It's a disgrace that next week 4 army veterans could be charged with murder over the deaths of Bloody Sunday protesters almost 5 decades ago. Soldiering on the front line is an incredibly difficult task. Making life-changing decisions whilst faced by the enemy isn't for the faint-hearted. To follow orders you were given, then have your actions picked apart by someone who spent his life polishing a leather chair is an insult. A man who's never had to make a split-second call whilst under fire is not qualified to pass judgment on a man who has. That's a fact. Defence Secretary Gavin Williamson is reportedly pushing for a 10-year limit on the prosecution for soldiers for alleged historical abuses. This would be a start, but I'd also like to see politicians who sanction us take some culpability, as well as assurances that soldiers will be left alone if they haven't strayed from the orders they were given. Finally, I believe that any investigation should be chaired by someone who has been there, seen it and done it, not just a suit trying to appease the PC brigade.
Phil, I don't think this is an easy issue, is it? It's not as simple as I think as you're saying. When I was chairman of the FA, I was chairman of the Hillsborough Committee there as well, and I got to know the Hillsborough families quite well. And what they wanted was a prosecution, and which is what they've got, and that's why we can't talk any more about it. And I suspect that the Bloody Sunday families are looking for the same thing. They're saying the last inquiry, there were 2 inquiries, one found against them, the second, much longer inquiry, found by and large for them. And I suspect they are looking for some prosecutions. Now, I don't want soldiers, ex-soldiers in their 70s to go to jail, because I wouldn't put anybody who's not a threat to society in jail anyway. I don't think there's any point. But I suspect they will be disappointed if there aren't some prosecutions.
Right, firstly, these soldiers were acting under orders, OK?
Yeah.
Secondly, this is a wider problem as well. And if we go and have a look at what my mate Bry was one of the first soldiers to fix bayonets since the World Wars, you know, involved in an incredible action. Probably, if you ask me, you know, he is an absolute model soldier, OK, and he was dragged through the coals by Shiner in the game. So let's just have a look at what Bry's got to say, and then we'll open it a bit further.
He was involved in a famous battle known as the Battle of Danny Boy, which has seen soldiers close and destroy a multiple enemy position, and then years later get accused of murder, mutilation and mistreatment.
What would your message be to the powers that be now to rectify this problem of soldiers being sort of like hauled across the coals?
Look, we've got to adhere to rules of engagement and the human law. It's absolutely, and we do. But there's also got to be a statute of limitation. There's got to be a timeline, a cut-off. You can't just start hounding soldiers decades and decades after the event. I mean, if there's something there, it needs to be investigated there and then and nipped in the bud, because I went through it myself, and after 10 years of pure pain, and to be found wholly without foundation, a degree of product of deliberate lies.
Danny Boy was in Iraq and a really, really hard-fought battle. Where I'm coming in with this, you can't just keep these things open for years and years and years, and you need a credible person to turn around and say, yes, this happened, that didn't happen, that happened, and evidence it, and look at it with a perspective from somebody who understands what is going on in the arena.
And not just, you know... Just to reference Shiner again, that's, of course, Phil Shiner, who took so many cases against
That's the one, yeah, that's the one. I mean, he got struck off.
Just a quick one from me, and you'll know far better than I. You describe it as a disgrace. I think it's a farce. Yeah. Because if a soldier is put into court and he said, well, why did you... Well, Colonel Jones gave me the order. Colonel Jones is now in the Great Parade Ground, or it was Captain Smith. None of these people who gave the orders, many of them will have died of natural causes or whatever. So you'll never be able to have a proper trial. How can you do that?
I think, you know, a lot of people in this country will watch the witch hunt that has gone on against our soldiers, and I think it would sicken them to their stomachs. You know, we ask men and women to put their lives on the line to defend this country, to do stuff that we couldn't or don't want to do. We can't ask them to do that if there are no protections in place for them. So if Gavin Williamson is going to bring forward this 10-year limit in the Queen's speech, that's fine, but he also has to bring through rules about the kind of evidence that you would prosecute someone with. You can't just come at 25 years later and say he killed him. There's got to be rules about the kind of evidence you're using. Yes, of course I agree. If soldiers, if there is evidence of criminal behaviour, yes, they should be prosecuted.
Absolutely.
But I think, let me just say the one thing. The Iraq Historical Allegations Team, investigation team, 1,500 cases, and Northmore, which was investigating cases in Afghanistan, 500 cases. Do we really think there were 2,000 and a bit soldiers abusing, like your mate said, murdering and mutilating and mistreating people? I don't believe it for a second.
That's the reason we have a process and we have rule of law, Carol. And, you know, there are already safeguards around decisions to prosecute. You already have to show that there is evidence and that it's in the public interest to prosecute someone.
But
So
just
soldiers who don't, when cases don't meet that test, they won't
a lot
be
of the people who
prosecuted.
had evidence in Bloody Sunday are now dead. And can people really remember stuff 20,
But can we talk
30,
about the
40
victims
years
as well? The
later?
victims of Bloody Sunday and other events like that didn't want to have to wait until now to see justice either. It's not, nobody wanted it to take this long. And the idea that victims shouldn't get to see justice because it's taken so long, so many inquiries.
What about the
unfair.
victims of Birmingham Square? We actively... No one's gone after them, have they? In fact, they actually handed them all out letters to say, you're safe now, lads, you're OK.
But that's a disgrace. That's a disgrace.
It is a disgrace,
we don't fight
yeah. It is a
injustice
disgrace.
with more injustice. Theresa May agrees with you, so let me just show you what she says about this.
We have an unfair situation at the moment. The situation we have at the moment is that the only people being investigated for things that happened in the part of these issues that happened in the past are those in our armed forces or those who served in law enforcement in Northern Ireland. That is patently unfair. Terrorists are not being investigated. Terrorists should be investigated, and that is what the government wants to see.
In the interest of balance, I just want to read you what Sinn Féin says, which is radically different. These remarks are deeply insensitive to the loss and pain of hundreds of families who have been bereaved by the British state forces. They have caused deep hurt and offence and could even undermine confidence in the rule of law and the administration of justice. They're also demonstrably untrue, as has been evidenced by official statistics and statements on legacy investigations. You know, I think, Phil, there are two issues. You're talking about the person who's involved in this, overseeing inquiries or prosecutions, should understand the reality of the battlefield. I agree with that. But the idea that we shouldn't hold people to account, and that it's in the interests of our armed forces to know that we have a military that is respected around the world because it enforces high standards of the rules of engagement and respecting human rights. And you do that by accountability.
By repeatedly chasing people down and hounding... These guys are in their 70s. This is a private soldier that on the day of the race, it was all going noisy. He was acting under the orders. He was doing an extremely dangerous job. He was probably looking after himself, his buddy, and trying to do a decent job, OK, in an absolute melee. And then 70 years later, he's getting pulled through the coals for it. That's insane. That's ridiculous.
No soldier who's following a lawful order, Afua, should ever be prosecuted. It's not their job to sit there and work out whether that order is lawful or right. It's their job to do what they're told at the time.
That's what the court would decide.
But
that's
it's not the soldier's fault.
You're saying we should have a 10-year moratorium, basically. Don't go back more than 10 years. Does that apply to all court cases? Do you apply that to the whole of the criminal justice system?
I don't even think it should be 10 years, actually, to be honest. I just think it's really unfair. You know, it is... Soldiers need to know that they have the government and they have the military on their side.
And that is such a... So if a soldier doesn't think that he's going to get the backing of the government for carrying out the actions that he's been told to, how can he carry those actions out with confidence? You're going to actually undermine the army by not backing him up. You're going to undermine those soldiers.
These are really complex cases. They've taken years to investigate, and you're portraying them as really black and white.
Because Brian's case was done overnight.
The reason it's even got to the stage of being the subject of a prosecution now is because there is enough grounds to believe that they weren't just following lawful orders and acting in accordance. And I can't decide that.
Brian's wife got a letter. Brian's wife got a letter through the post.
But you can't put it all down to one individual and claim
no, he's not.
No, but I'm not. But there's more than one individual involved in.
1,500 cases with the Iraqi historical.
Okay,
with lawyers chasing those people.
But there were 3,668 claims have been made against British troops. Allegations, right? There have been no prosecutions. There have been no prosecutions in Iraq. So, because we have a system of law.
Would you stop people making allegations then as well, Carol?
Well, no, but I just think when you have lawyers whose whole raison d'etre is to make a profit, and when you have those lawyers getting people in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, going to look for people who may or may not have...
What would you say?
No, but Phil Shiner's lot.
Do you accept that it's possible that there have been abuses by the British Armed Forces and there are genuine victims that exist? And if you accept that that's possible, What do you recommend for those people to get justice?
The Army has its own rank system in place as well to safeguard against that. It also is controlled from the very top. So
we know it
what I'm
happens.
saying is the only person getting hauled through the coals is Private Baconneck, who was there and there on the sharp end of the day.
Yeah.
It's not Colonel Bogey at the top, all right, and it's not the politician that sent him.
And it's
Private
interesting you say
Baconneck.
politicians. It's interesting you say politicians because it's worth noting, of course, that Northern Ireland Secretary Karen Bradley was in trouble over that. Earlier in the week, she said that she thought the deaths caused were, quotes, not crimes. We need to now say she has apologised. I'm profoundly sorry for the offence and hurt that my words have caused. Language was wrong, even though it was not my intention. It was deeply insensitive to the many of those who lost loved ones, and they wonder why the Army has a recruiting crisis.